Hi everyone! Okay, before we start this video essay, I just need to make a forward that although, yes, I am praising Charles Dickens's Hard Times, I am painfully aware of Dickens's racism, his xenophobia, and his genocidal proclivities towards Indian people. So I just want to put it out there that Dickens had some very, very ugly views on race. He was certainly an imperialist, and it's questionable as to whether his sympathy for the working class and the downtrodden also extended to those of other colors beyond white. However, that doesn't mean that his work is valueless, okay? Dickens's work is extremely valuable literature from a Marxist socialist perspective. So I don't think that we should simply throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can separate the author from the work, okay? So, yeah, just to make it very clear, I'm not actually endorsing Dickens's moral character. I think that Dickens was a really, really nasty, racist, imperialist. But at the same time, you cannot deny that his work contained profound truths. Yes, I'm actually painfully aware that Dickens was among the worst of men who wrote the best of books. Okay? So while I praise his literary ability, I have to make it clear that I am not endorsing his character in any way. Okay? Dickens was a horrible person. In short, he was horrible to non-white people. He eloped with a young actress and abandoned his wife and children. And basically, it's very, very difficult to say whether he actually, really extended his sympathies to the working class who suffered as a result of colonialism. But that doesn't mean that we can't use some of his ideas, okay? And we have to give credit when it's due, okay? All right, thank you. Now enjoy the video.
The Victorian author Charles Dickens is remembered as one of the pioneers of modern English literature, his works considered to be among the best classical Western works in history to date. Dickens is unique in the sense that, unlike most of his contemporaries from the Georgian or Victorian eras, such as Jane Austen or William Thackeray, whose works mainly focused on the lives of the glitzy and glamorous middle to upper classes of 19th century Western society, sort of like how Crazy Rich Asians tends to focus on the 10% of Asians that the 90% of us hate. Dickens's novels tended to focus on the common, downtrodden masses, drawing particular attention to the plight of the working class. Most of Dickens's stories have a moralistic message. In The Christmas Carol, for instance, the miserly and mean-spirited industrialist Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by three specters who attempt to mend his ways by appealing to his guilty conscience. In the novel Great Expectations, Dickens demonstrates how social class does not naturally make one a proper moral man, and that there is a clear distinction between a gentleman and a gentleman. Get it? The most famous work of Charles Dickens is, no doubt, Oliver Twist, which is ubiquitous with the starving boy who asks for more porridge, also known as the bane of every high school literature student. In his novels, Dickens shows us through vivid imagery the sordid and depressing labor conditions of the Victorian era, and draws attention to the exploitation and misery of both adults and children that propelled the West forward into the modern era. The Industrial Revolution was what made Great Britain great, a modern and prosperous economy, but it was paid for by the sweat, blood, and tears of the working class, quite literally, in both Great Britain and abroad through the exportation of misery, aka colonialism and imperialism. While Charles Dickens himself was no Marxist, and he was certainly skeptical of class conflict and a proponent of class collaboration, his novels will certainly appeal to a Marxist or socialist audience due to the constantly recurring Marxist themes of class consciousness, exploitation, and alienation, aka the estrangement from human nature, a theme which will be further discussed and elaborated using the novel that we're describing today. Yeah, Dickens was no communist, but he was certainly cognizant of the horrors of late-stage capitalism, having once been a child laborer working in a factory for 10 hours a day for a measly sum of 6 shillings a week to pay off his family's debts. In fact, although the two men never met personally despite both living in London at the same time, the German philosopher Karl Marx spoke very, very highly of Dickens's work, saying, "The present splendid brotherhood of fiction writers in England, whose graphic and eloquent pages have issued to divulge more political and social truths than have been uttered by all the professional politicians, publicists, and moralists put together, have described every section of the middle class, from the highly genteel, annuitant, and fundholder who looks upon all sorts of business as vulgar, to the little shopkeeper and lawyer's clerk." Now, certainly some of Dickens's best-known works include masterpieces like Oliver Twist, Great Expectations, and David Copperfield. But one of his less-known works is his 10th novel called Hard Times, which is, in my opinion, his most important work for this increasingly technocratic era we live in. And this novel will be the subject of his video, although I encourage you, if you're a socialist or a Marxist, to read Charles Dickens, even though you may not agree with him 100%. So if you haven't read Hard Times, I'd strongly recommend skimming through a quick synopsis of it, or going on Cliff Notes, getting the gist of it, or perhaps watching the movie version, which has been so kindly posted on YouTube as public property. Now, link in the description box so that you'll have a better understanding of what I'm talking about in this video. Now, a few videos ago, I made a response to Republican economist Thomas Sowell's scathing criticism against soft subjects such as gender studies, philosophy, and English literature, in what he, like many of his fellow Western conservatives, deemed to be useless subjects with no practical value, unlike hard subjects such as the sciences, linguistics, history, or mathematics. But Sowell's vitriolic denunciation at theoretical as opposed to factual subjects is neither a new phenomenon nor is it unique to America. In our increasingly technocratic world, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, education is seen only as a means by which one attains skills to become gainfully employed, and simply nothing more than that. Thus, enterprising and intelligent young people who find they are able to make money through entrepreneurship think to themselves, "What is the point in me going to university? I can make money without going to university. Getting a degree and working in an office is for old-fashioned clods like our parents." But what people don't seem to realize is that making money has not always been the only point in getting an education. In the past, university students taking hard subjects such as sciences, linguistics, or mathematics also had to learn subjects such as ethics, philosophy, critical thinking, and a whole range of other skills beyond just cold, hard technical skills. Universities at one point were not simply glorified job training centers, but places where you develop the basis of your character and life philosophy. Yes, learning practical skills is certainly important, but it isn't the only reason you get an education. Education is also for self-cultivation and spiritual development. Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill, for instance, whom Western conservatives profess to love, were well versed in classical literature and considered themselves to be moral philosophers rather than cold hard economists or statisticians. Confucius may have had a wide repertoire of technical skills, but he never considered someone truly educated unless they had some awareness of the humanities. In fact, Confucius believed that with the right training in ethics and moral propriety, laws would be obsolete, since Confucianism operates on the arguable premise that all human beings are born good, but need to have that goodness cultivated through education. Now, believe it or not, in the olden days prior to the Industrial Revolution and our subsequent encounters with the West, the highest honor an Asian family could hope for would be for their son to be an accomplished scholar or philosopher, not some white-collar drone working in a STEM field or some parasitic merchant who only knows how to hoard money but not give it back to society, or some miserable corporate man drowning in nihilism and sake, serving some corporate overlord. You see, this is prior to the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we now live in a post-industrial revolution age, so mores have changed. So, of course, in this day and age, thanks to industrialization and a technocratic approach resulting from post-industrial revolution Western influence, nobody really cares for poets or philosophers like myself or Confucius anymore. Had I not learned hard subjects such as history or linguistics, I might not be a teacher, but a starving philosopher on the streets. Well, now again, I must stress, make sure that you have some inkling of the plot of Hard Times before continuing the rest of this video. Okay? Now, without further ado, let's begin. Now what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. Stick to facts, sir. Hard Times is set in the fictional industrial town of Coketown, and it is about a misguided but well-meaning schoolmaster named Thomas Gradgrind, described as an eminently practical man. A former industrialist and firm believer in Victorian utilitarianism, Mr. Gradgrind regards only cold, hard facts to be useful, and anything else to be useless. He believes that only topics worth discussing and studying are hard, factual topics such as economics, history, geography, mathematics, and science, and that literature, music, art, and poetry are simply idle fantasies that are worthless because they serve no practical function. At the beginning of the novel, Mr. Gradgrind is a joyless, soulless machine of a man. He stifles any notions of fun or creativity, not only in the children of his school, but also in his own children, drilling them in nothing but an endless barrage of facts, causing them to resent him. He expresses contempt for circus performers since they make a living by entertaining people, but not by producing anything of practical value in his eyes. And yet, despite having the external demeanor of a cold, hard machine, he is not a man without compassion. When Sissy, one of his students' father, abandons her, Mr. Gradgrind takes her into his household as a servant and quote-unquote adopts her, looking after her to the best of his ability. Eventually, when both of his children leave his house to escape from his exacting grasp, his daughter Louisa entering a loveless marriage with the rapacious and callous capitalist Mr. Bounderby, and his son Tom going to live with his sister and brother-in-law, Mr. Gradgrind finds that Sissy is really his only company and the only person to look after his wife, the ailing Mrs. Gradgrind. Eventually, Gradgrind is forced to question his own living philosophy after a series of harrowing events. His daughter, Louisa, returns home one day to confront him and has a nervous breakdown after coming to the epiphany that all her life she has suppressed her true nature in the pursuit of logic and facts and cold, hard self-interest. Father, if you had known when we were last together here what even I feared when I strove against it, as it has been my task from infancy to strive against every natural prompting that has arisen in my heart. If you had known that there lingered in my breast sensibilities, affections, weaknesses, capable of being cherished into strength, defying all the calculations ever made by man, and no more known to his arithmetic than his creator is, would you have given me to the husband whom I am now sure that I hate? He said, No, no, my poor child. Would you have doomed me at any time to the frost and blight that have hardened and spoiled me? Would you have robbed me for no one's enrichment, only for the greater desolation of this world, of the immaterial part of my life, the spring and summer of my belief, my refuge from what is sordid and bad in the real things around me, my school in which I should have learned to be more humble and more trusting with them, and to hope in my little sphere to make them better? Oh, no, no, Louisa. In the theory of alienation, like I mentioned that in the earlier part of this video, the theory of alienation in a Marxist sense means the idea that human beings, due to the stratification of labor in the capitalist society, vocational skills and, human beings take up vocational skills and enter jobs or study things they hate because they are coerced by the capitalist framework, which means you either get a job or die. By putting his daughter through years and years of rote learning and stifling any creativity or, any critical thinking, creativity, or passion in her, he has thus alienated her from her true nature. And all those years of repression have finally come full circle and caused her to snap. In Marx's ideal world, which is the complete antithesis of Gradgrind's ideal world, as a result of the Victorian emphasis on utilitarianism, we would ideally have the freedom to pursue our passions and dreams and excel at a trade we are passionate about, not one that we simply do in order to keep ourselves alive. Work, in Marx's view, ought to give purpose to life and not simply be an act of going through the motions to keep ourselves alive, with no time for the pursuit of leisure or spirituality, essential human components in his view. Now, spirituality is very different from religion. Marx had a dim view of religion, but not spirituality. Gradgrind's son, Tom, despite being incredibly intelligent and academically capable, ends up becoming a heinous criminal, robbing Mr. Bounderby's bank and framing an innocent man for it, much to Mr. Gradgrind's shame at his son becoming such an immoral miscreant. His favorite student, Bitzer, ends up a cold-blooded reptile who is purely driven by cold-blooded self-interest and completely devoid of empathy for others. When Mr. Gradgrind tries to help his son to escape to avoid the law, Bitzer confronts them and makes clear his intention to turn Tom into the police, not because it's the moral or ethical thing to do, but because he knows he will earn Mr. Bounderby's, his boss's trust, and subsequently be promoted at work. Asked by Gradgrind if he has a heart, Bitzer replies as follows. "The circulation, sir," replied Bitzer, smiling at the oddity of the question, "couldn't be carried on without one. No man, sir, acquainted with the facts established by Harvey relating to the circulation of the blood can doubt that I have a heart." Is it accessible, cried Mr. Gradgrind, to any compassionate influence? "Oh, it is accessible to reason, sir," returned the excellent young man, and to nothing else. They stood looking at each other. Mr. Gradgrind's face was as white as the pursuer's. "If this is solely a question of self-interest with you," Mr. Gradgrind began. "Oh, I beg your pardon for interrupting you, sir," returned Bitzer, "but I am sure you know that the whole social system is a question of self-interest. What you must always appeal to is a person's self-interest. It's your only hold. We are so constituted. I was brought up in that catechism when I was very young, sir, as you are aware." Now, it's clear that Bitzer understood the question in the literal, factual sense, not the figurative, emotive sense. He is not an immoral man in that he does not lie or cheat or steal deliberately. Rather, he is an amoral man. He has no concept of morality, and although he is filled to the brim with knowledge about various scientific, historical, mathematical, and geographical facts, there is one thing that has not been imparted to him, and that is ethics. Bitzer is in effect a monster of Gradgrind's own making by his fanatical obsession with cold, hard fact, and no mind given to things like feelings or empathy, things that are not bankable skills. Fortunately, the circus master, Mr. Slary, manages to fool Bitzer, giving Tom enough time to escape. Even so, Gradgrind now realizes the folly of his ways, and he now understands the key message that Dickens is trying to pass in his book. Facts alone do not constitute an education, and soft subjects that do not have any apparent, tangible, measurable, practical value, such as music, literature, philosophy, and art, cannot and must not be neglected. Happily, the story ends with Mr. Gradgrind becoming a wiser, more enlightened man. Although Mr. Gradgrind is technically the protagonist of Hard Times, it is really Sissy, his adopted daughter, who creates the greatest impact in the novel. Sissy not only proves to be a positive effect on the Gradgrind household, she also possesses profound insight that other characters with much higher IQs do not. Now, I've argued before that IQ and intelligence are not necessarily correlated. And that seems like a very astounding proposition to make. But you can go visit my previous lectures. You can find it in my videos, that intelligence is very difficult to measure. And it's the height of arrogance to actually think you can measure it. But anyway, when her teacher with the punny name of Mr. Choakumchild inquires as to whether a small country of about 50 people with the net wealth of $50 million is a wealthy country, a spoiler alert, the correct answer is supposed to be yes. Sissy replies that it depends on how the money is distributed and whether it is distributed equitably. Granted, that is the wrong answer because only a dirty left-wing communist would get to the question of individual material circumstances and societal inequality, since we cold, hard factualists are only supposed to be concerned with how much wealth is factually circulating in the country when determining if it is a rich country and not who's thriving and who's starving and living in squalor. When asked by Mr. Chokum Chow to comment on a nation of 1 million people with 25 people starving to death on the streets, Sissy says that it would be just as awful whether it was 25 people or a million or a million. Again, as expected, this is the wrong answer, as the correct answer is to say that it is only 0.000025% of the population, and therefore a minuscule amount. I did mention in response to Thomas Sowell's argument that soft subjects, unlike hard subjects, were more likely to create dangerous people due to the fact that they are based in quote-unquote emotion and resentment rather than strict fact and logic. The fact of the matter is that Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were both technocratic, scientifically advanced nations that placed an overarching emphasis on hard subjects with little emphasis on soft subjects such as philosophy, literature, or social science. In fact, lots of those books were burned because they were deemed dangerous to public order. The Japanese scientists in Unit 731, as well as the Nazi scientists in Hitler's Germany, were no doubt incredibly capable pioneers in their fields and certainly highly competent hard subject practitioners, rational and logical men who did not let emotion get in the way of their work. But their sheer and utter lack of humanity, coupled with their social Darwinist philosophy, and the fact that they lacked any semblance of empathy and saw their victims as objects rather than sentient beings, meant that they were able to perform unspeakable acts of cruelty on them for the sake of science. No doubt science and technology, as I've mentioned, has made our lives more comfortable and convenient, but it's also produced weapons of killing and mass destruction, and has been used in the service of some rather questionable philosophies. No doubt science and technology is driving the world forward, but Dickens challenges us to consider, are we moving forward in the right direction? Dickens cautions us that this Western obsession with cold, hard fact and logic and dismissal of the tenderer aspects of human existence, such as creativity, imagination, and compassion, with this sort of approach, we may certainly develop technology and industry, but at what cost? Well, at the expense of our humanity, of course. It is this rigorous obsession with cold, hard fact that gave birth to the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the modern conveniences we now enjoy, such as the refrigerator, the aeroplane, and the computer through which I am now recording this video lecture. It is a scientific method that has given rise to modern medicine that can treat almost anything that would have been considered a death sentence 200 years ago. Absolutely no one is denying the importance of hard subjects for scientific progress and economic development. But Dickens also cautions us to take care that we do not develop these things at the expense of our humanity, for it would indeed be a bleak, callous, and merciless Ayn Randian sort of world, a world in which people do not regard other human beings as sentient creatures with feelings, but machines to be used and manipulated for one's personal gain. The tragic loss of life is simply a statistic of mortality, and the suffering of another person is simply a cold, hard fact of life. But most importantly, although practitioners of hard skills such as doctors, lawyers, engineers, and accountants certainly give material enhancement to our lives, it is the practitioners of soft skills, subjects decried by Mr. Gradgrind as useless subjects, such as artists, poets, musicians, and creative writers, and YouTubers like myself, that give spiritual enhancement to our lives and make our lives worth living. It is certainly inconceivable to imagine a world without the progress of science and technology, but it would be just as bleak to imagine a world without creativity and spirituality. Thus, As long as the work someone does is honest and honorable work, even if they are a musician, a visual artist, or a starving YouTuber trying to make ends meet, you should respect the work they do and not categorize professions into useful and useless professions. Perhaps a sentimental song sung by a street busker may not have any tangible statistical value, but it may have brightened up someone's gloomy day and prevented that person from falling into deeper depression. Now, a painting may not have any tangible statistical value, but to some it may provide comfort and relaxation to them to simply gaze at it. Now, as Confucius said, all things have beauty, but we choose not to see it. All work, provided it does not hurt or harm anyone, has value, whether we choose to see it or not. I therefore challenge you, dear viewer, to give a generous tip to a street busker you see on the street, to encourage a struggling young artist by buying one of his paintings, and of course to encourage me to continue more content by subscribing to my channel. Thank you and have a nice day.